Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Mark Owens of Skylight Financial Group, President of the Cleveland Irish Network and a proud City Club member. I'm pleased today to welcome today's speaker, His Excellency Dan Mulhall, the 18th Ambassador of Ireland to the United States. It's been 20 years since the Good Friday Agreement was brokered, ending decades of conflict in Northern Ireland. Much of the success of the peace process was due to both Ireland and the United Kingdom being members of the European Union. The UK is now preparing to leave the EU. Phase one of these negotiations were tough, but led to an agreement that a hard border would not exist in the island of Ireland. But what's next on the horizon as the Brexit process moves forward, and what does Brexit mean for the future of Irish-British relations? There's arguably no better person to address these questions than today's speaker. A native of Waterford, Daniel Mulhall took up duties as Ireland's 18th Ambassador to the United States in August 2017. Ambassador Mulhall began his career in the Department of Foreign Affairs and his early diplomatic assignments in New Delhi, Vienna, Brussels, and Edinburgh, where he was Ireland's first Consul General. He later served as Ireland's ambassador to Malaysia, where he also accredited to Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. From 2009 to 2013, he was Ireland's ambassador to Germany. Before coming to Washington last year, he served as Ireland's ambassador in London. During his time in Britain, he was a regular speaker on political, literary, and historical topics at universities all over the country. Before departing for Washington, he was made a free man of the City of London in recognition of his work as an ambassador. A graduate of the University College Cork, Ambassador Mulhall specialized in modern Irish history. He maintains a keen interest in Irish history and literature, authoring A New Day Dawning, A Portrait of Ireland in 1900, and serving as co-editor of The Shaping of Modern Ireland, a centenary assessment, in addition to making numerous contributions to books, newspapers, and journals. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Dan Mulhall.
Well, thank you for those warm words of welcome, and it's wonderful to be here. It's great to be in Cleveland today. I've been discovering lots about Cleveland over the last 24 hours, mainly the fact that most of the Irish here come from Mayo, and both, thank you. I knew that would get a cheer. So before I start on my speech, I would say that my dream for this year is that Mayo might win the All-Ireland football final. Finally, and that my own city, or my own county of Waterford, might win the hurling, because the last time we won was 1958, almost as long ago as Mayo's last victory. And then for a great treble this year, let's have one of the great Cleveland teams win their major championship this year, okay? All right? So look, I'm delighted to be here at the City Club, and I understand clearly the distinguished record this club has, and the kind of speakers it's had over the past make me feel very humbled to be here, because I can't compete with many of the people that you've had here over the last century. But all credit to this club for holding aloft, brightly shining, the flame of free trade in ideas, free exchange of information, because there's nothing more important than that in today's world, in fact, in any world that I would like to live in. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to be here in cooperation with the Irish Network Cleveland and with Global Cleveland. So one of my early impressions of the United States, and I've been here now 5 months. I arrived here in late August of last year. One of my early impressions is that America is made up of cities that have a strength, a dynamism, and a personality all of their own. And therefore, I now realize it's wrong to think of the United States as a diversity only in terms of the difference between urban and rural America, between North and South, or East and West. Each city I have visited, and this is my 12th city that I visited, but the first one I visited in 2018, has its own proud history, its own economic and political ecosystem. And I recognize Cleveland as a city that rose to prominence in the 19th century, suffered an economic decline in the second half of the 20th, and is now emerging strongly again as a city with a new horizon and a new future in prospect. So I want to thank all of you for coming here, and thank you for the interest you've shown in Ireland, in Irish-US relations, and in the current situation we find ourselves in because of the challenges posed for us by the decision of the United Kingdom to leave the European Union. Ireland, I think, has a unique relationship with the United States. That relationship was forged over centuries, and in particular, because of the vast influx of Irish immigrants into the United States that occurred in the period between about 1830 and the end of the 19th century, when the Irish came here in large numbers, including to the city of Cleveland, and helped to transform this country. They arrived here fleeing Ireland from famine and deprivation, and they made new lives for themselves in cities like Cleveland and many others across these United States. And they contributed to making America the country it is today. They came with a sense of grievance from their homeland, and they carried that identity, that Irish identity, with them. And this helped to sustain their sense of Irishness. And that sense was passed down through the generations as new arrivals came to this country from Ireland, and they added to a large and diverse Irish community that preserved its links with the home country. Thanks to the scholarly work done in connection with the centenary in 2016 of the Easter Rising of 1916, we now know that Irish Americans played a hugely important part in inspiring the move towards Irish independence in the opening decades of the 20th century. Remarkably, this Irish heritage continues to connect Irish Americans with their ancestral homeland. This was not an inevitable outcome. And the fact is that many other immigrant nationalities have a less pronounced sense of their ancestral homeland than the Irish Americans have of Ireland. And I meet people all the time who are 4, 5, 6, 7 generations removed from Ireland, but who still preserve a strong sense of Irish heritage. And I celebrate that, and I'm uplifted by it, I'm energized by it. And I will do my best in my time here to connect with Irish America in every way I can. So that was the past. What about the present and the future? Well, the most recent phase of Irish-American relations began in the 60s, when US multinationals started to set up bases in Ireland, started to invest in Ireland. And now, today, there are 700 American companies with operations in Ireland. Many companies have thousands, some even more than 10,000 employees in Ireland. They are a vital part of the new reality of Ireland, which is as a fully developed economy with a strong emphasis on high technology industries and the services sector. The other great game changer for Ireland was in 1973, when we joined what's now the European Union. At that time, Ireland was by far the least developed country in the European Union. Our wealth levels at that time on a per capita basis were about 2/3 or less of the European average. So we really were an outlier in European terms because our country was overly dependent on a single industry, which was agriculture, a single sector of our economy, which represented some 60% of our exports. And we were overly dependent on a single export market, which was Great Britain, which took nearly 2/3 of our exports at that time. And the European Union helped us to diversify our trade and to grow our economy. It also made us far more attractive than we had been before as a location for foreign direct investment, including from the United States. Our state's population in 1960 was down to 3 million. We're now back up to 4.8 million. We'll have 5 million people in the next decade. But we still have, on the island of Ireland, our population is still less than it was in 1840. We're the only country in Europe that has a population that's lower now today than it was in the 1840s. So EU membership has really been vital for Ireland in helping us to achieve our goals as a country of creating a prosperous and developed economy, a diverse economy, which can employ our people and provide opportunities for them to remain at home and live their lives at home, and in many cases to come back from the United States or from Britain or Australia, which happened during our great boom between 1992 and 2008. So US companies come to Ireland for a range of reasons. Because we have access to the European single market, because of our young and highly educated population, because of the quality and transparency of our legal system based on the common law, a business-friendly environment, and the fact that so many American companies have operated successfully in Ireland for decades. We also have a 12.5% corporation tax rate, which applies across the board to all companies, whether they're Irish or foreign. And that rate has been in place for decades. We've had that rate for decades now, and there's a firm commitment on the part of our government to continue to offer a stable and transparent corporation tax system with a rate fixed at 12.5%, no lower, no higher. So the flow of US investment has really helped to transform the Irish economy. It has also produced an extraordinarily strong economic relationship between Ireland and the United States. Trade between our two countries now amounts to the astonishing figure of $100 billion a year. 100 billion, that's billion with a B. And for a country with less than 5 million people, that volume of trade is quite remarkable. And it demonstrates the importance of this trade. Our trade is also very balanced. We have a surplus in manufactured goods, and the US has a surplus in services. Overall, it's balanced, and it benefits both of our economies. And Ireland is an important market for many US companies, including many who are based here in Cleveland. And many of today's Irish-owned companies are companies that have emerged from the multinationals, where Irish people work for multinational companies, saw an opportunity, and then set up their own companies that have grown and developed. And those companies, in many cases, are now investing here in the United States. So that's another factor that has come into play in recent times. So Irish companies, as they grow and develop, they generate profits, and they need to invest those profits. And there's a limit to what they can do in Ireland, in their sectors. So naturally, they look outside of Ireland for opportunities. And the two places they look to most often are Britain and the United States. And we now have some 400 Irish companies who have investments and operations here in the United States, in all 50 states. And between them, they employ 100,000 people, 100,000 Americans. And this trend has intensified in recent years. Most of those investments have taken place in the last decade because of the need for Irish companies to internationalize their operations And I expect this trend to intensify in the future. Among the European Union countries, Ireland has a particular profile. We are committed members of the European Union. For reasons I've explained, it's been a huge benefit to Ireland, diversifying our trade, improving our economic situation, giving our people opportunities that they didn't have before. We have, since World War II, maintained a traditional policy of military neutrality. But our troops are active in UN peacekeeping since the 1950s. There has never been a day when there haven't been significant percentages, significant numbers of Irish troops serving with the United Nations in different parts of the world. We have also a special affinity with those countries that became independent, that broke away from the European empires in the second half of the 20th century. Ireland was the country that blazed a trail for the African and Asian countries that broke free from the European empires of the 19th century. Because we were the first country to break free from a successful empire when we became independent from Britain in 1922. And that's why we maintain very strong connections with Africa in particular. And we have an active development aid program. Last year, we spent about $700 million on development aid, mainly in Africa. We will be seeking a seat on the UN Security Council for the years 2021 and 2022. We're doing that because we want to mark the centenary of Irish independence by again taking a prominent role among the nations of the earth to contribute to the development of the United Nations in those crucial years ahead. We're a close friend of the United States, but we're one with an independent frame of mind when it comes to international issues. We speak our mind and we are not afraid to stand up for the things we believe in. If you ask me what I would like to see from the future of Irish-US relations, I would say more of the same, please. After all, what is there not to like about a friendly relationship based on historical family ties, mutual economic advantage, and shared values and shared interests? We have to recognize that the world around us is changing, and the anchors we once relied upon may no longer be able to hold things in place. There are changes underway in Europe. The European Union is changing. It has been a bulwark of prosperity and stability in Europe and the world for decades. But there are new challenges, economic, political, and security challenges that face Europe at present. The commitment of EU countries, including Ireland, is to bond together more strongly in order to collectively face those challenges. The UK's decision to leave the European Union, which we hoped would not happen, we were hoping they would stay. We think it's a bad move, but it's, of course, a matter for Britain, not for Ireland. But it will affect Ireland. We are fully committed to EU membership. And EU membership enjoys the support of 88% of the Irish electorate in the last opinion poll I saw. So we believe that Britain's departure from the European Union will be a loss for Britain, but that's a matter for them. For the European Union, because it's not a good thing to lose an important member of any club or organisation. And for Ireland, because of our close ties with Britain. Now, currently only 15% of our exports go to the UK. But in certain sectors, such as food and agriculture, which are still important, though no longer as important as they were before for Ireland, our dependence on the UK market is up to 40%. So we will be challenged by Britain's decision to leave the European Union. And our aim now is to minimise the negative impact of that decision on Ireland and to maximise any benefits that may flow for Ireland from Britain's, in our view, unwise decision to leave the European Union. We have concerns about our future trading relationship with Britain, which may be affected when Britain leaves the European single market and the customs union. We hope they will decide to stay in the single market, to stay in the customs union, but that's a matter for them. But a key thing for us is we have to ensure that the open border that exists in Ireland at the moment, has been there for more than 20 years, cannot be affected by Brexit. And the British government in December committed itself to doing what is necessary in the future to avoid any border controls being imposed on the island of Ireland. That border now, when you visit, I'm sure those of you who have visited have seen it, you drive across it and you don't even know you've crossed the border. It's totally open, there are no customs controls, no controls of any sort. People move back and forth from neighbouring villages. Farmers milk their cows in Northern Ireland and send the milk down south to be processed. Coca-Cola produces a huge quantity of its syrup and concentrate south of the border in County Mayo, and it sends it to Northern Ireland for bottling. So you have all of these connections that are there. And obviously we have to protect and preserve those wonderfully positive flows between North and South in Ireland, which have helped to bring our two parts of Ireland together more than ever before. And as part of the Good Friday Agreement, it's vital that we don't interfere with that positive evolution of North-South relations in Ireland. Now, there will be some advantages for Ireland when we become the sole English-speaking country in the European Union. We expect that this will make Ireland an even more attractive location for US investment than we currently are. And remember, we have 700 plus US companies in Ireland at the moment. We expect that more companies will decide that they need to have a base in Europe and will choose Ireland as an English-speaking country within the European Union. Because we reckon they will want to operate in a country where they can do their business in English, where they can read the laws, and where the business culture is very similar to the business culture you find here in the United States. I also believe there is scope for Ireland to play an enhanced role in transatlantic relations. Britain, after all, has always had what it sees, what it calls a special relationship with the United States. We have one too, although we don't talk about it in those terms. But it seems to me that when Britain leaves the European Union, there will be an opportunity for Ireland to be more active in the area of EU-US relations, which are vital for the future. Because the transatlantic community, in all of its complexity and diversity, is a vital part of what sustains the well-being of our peoples and our societies. And in a changing world, the values that are shared across the Atlantic need to be promoted, preserved, and defended. And that's why EU-US relations are so vital for now and for the future. And I believe that we have an opportunity in Ireland to play a greater role in developing those relations between the European Union and the United States for the future. I, of course, am fully aware of the limitations that a country of Ireland's size has. We're not going to be able to replace the UK, a country that's 15 times our size in population and in GDP. But we can, I believe, as a country that has a special understanding of the United States, we can be a bridge between Europe and the United States, which I believe to be a vital requirement for the future. Ireland has been a major beneficiary of the last 3 decades of globalization. As a small English-speaking country with a highly educated population, we were ideally equipped to exploit the opportunities that arose over the last 3 decades. And those 3 decades have really seen the transformation of Ireland because the new economy has proven to be particularly attractive, and we've proven ourselves to be particularly well equipped to exploit the opportunities of the global economy as it's developed over the past 3 decades. And therefore, we have a commitment to argue the case for continued free flows of trade and investment around the world. And we don't want to see any rolling back of the globalization that has benefited so many countries over the last 30 years, and any return or resurgence of economic nationalism. I'm not blind to the challenges that arise today, especially from those who feel aggrieved and feel that they have been bypassed by developments in the global economy. It is clear that reforms will be required to secure a more equitable and stable global economic environment. We will be a country that continues to believe in the value of multilateral approaches to global problems and of the continued freeing up of world trade and investment. We were strong advocates during our presidency in 2013 of the TTIP negotiations. We got those negotiations started under the Irish presidency. Sadly, they didn't come to fruition. We still are a strong advocate for freeing up trade and investment flows because we believe that's the way of the future. Our solution to current predicaments is to refurbish and refresh the fabric of the global system and not to withdraw into national silos. So I believe that Ireland and the US have considerable common ground and a shared stake in a world in which the rule of law continues to prevail and democratic and tolerant values that we share continue to act as an underpinning of our prosperity and security. I also look to a new era in our engagement with Irish America, because Ireland is now a different country from the one that emerged into independence 100 years ago. Irish America is a different place now from what it was 100 years ago. And I hope that the future of Irish-US relations, having started with the movement of people across the Atlantic in the 19th and early 20th centuries, having developed in the last 50 years through greater exchanges of goods and services across the Atlantic, I hope that the future will see greater collaboration in areas of education, science, technology, innovation, because we now are no longer a country that just needs to take benefit from the global environment. We can now contribute to that environment. And our current Taoiseach, who's 39 years old and has a different view of the world because he grew up in a different Ireland. His father was an Indian doctor, his mother an Irish nurse. He has committed himself and his government to doubling Ireland's global footprint, to doubling the size of our foreign service, to doubling the size of our trade organisation, Enterprise Ireland, of IDA, which is our investment promotion body, and of Tourism Ireland, and also to doubling the size of our aid programme, which could rise to more than $2 billion in 10 or 12 years' time. So we are an ambitious country, and therefore I believe that there are opportunities to connect Ireland and the United States in ways that our ancestors who left Ireland in situations of poverty and privation with an Irish spirit that they brought with them to this country, they could never have dreamt of the idea of us now, our two countries, collaborating between our universities, our health institutes. I'm going to meet some people from the Cleveland Clinic this evening. That's the kind of collaboration I hope we will have for the future, which will build on the great heritage of Irish-American connections through blood and family ties and through economic links of recent times. I believe the future for our ties is one in which we can connect to the realm of ideas and shared values for the 21st century. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well done, sir. Thank you. This is going to be very brief.
If you don't mind time as well.
You're perfect, perfectly on time, sir. And if you would like to,
talk all the time.
yeah. Speaking of ideas and values and so forth, if you're interested in a city club of Dublin, let me know. Today we are enjoying a Friday forum with His Excellency Dan Mulhall, Ambassador of Ireland to the United States, and we're about to begin the Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone: city club members, guests, students. Holding our microphones today are Content Coordinator Bliss Davis and our Membership and Youth Forum Council Chair, Tiolu Orsanya. May we have our first question, please?
Hello, thank you for being here. I was wondering, we're now 20 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and post-Brexit, how do you see Ireland's involvement in the continued peace process there changing with less EU involvement and money being put into these projects?
That's a very good question, thank you. I purposely didn't mention too much about the peace process because I knew there'd be questions about it, so I decided to leave the peace process for questions. The peace process in Northern Ireland has been a great achievement for the parties in Northern Ireland, for the British and Irish governments, and indeed for the United States Congress and government. It played a very important and positive role in bringing peace about 20 years ago with the Good Friday Agreement. That agreement changed Northern Ireland. The previous 30 years had seen 3,500 people lose their lives, many more injured, maimed, traumatized. The last 20 years have been peaceful, but there is still a need to build the kind of reconciliation that's needed for the future of Northern Ireland and indeed for the future of Ireland. Sadly, the executive that is at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, which governs Northern Ireland as a devolved government, has not functioned for the last year. And repeated efforts have been made to bring the two main parties, the Democratic Unionist Party on the Unionist side and Sinn Féin on the Nationalist side, together and to re-establish the executive so that the Good Friday Agreement can be properly operated. And those efforts have failed. And this week, again, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, Deputy Prime Minister as well, is in Northern Ireland with his counterpart, the British Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, newly appointed Karen Bradley. And they're working day and night to try and bring the parties together. It is true that the European Union played a very important supportive role, not as a frontline actor in the peace process, but as a supporter through funding and also through the encouragement that European Union leaders gave to the process. And undoubtedly, Brexit, while it hasn't caused the breakdown of the executive in Northern Ireland, it undoubtedly complicates the story and it complicates the situation. And for our point of view, it's vital, particularly because of the challenges of Brexit, that Northern Ireland should have a political voice around the table in London, ensuring that Northern Ireland's interests are fully taken into account. So the Irish government is fully committed to ensuring that the Good Friday Agreement is fully implemented, to getting the executive back up and running again so that the agreement can function properly, and to avoiding negative effects from Brexit, and to promoting the reconciliation process that's so vital to bring the communities together in Northern Ireland so that genuine political progress can continue to be made.
Your Excellency, thank you for coming today. Right here. My name is Tamara Sin. I'm from Mayfield High School. And earlier you mentioned that you would like to minimize the effect that Brexit would have on Ireland relationships. I would like to know and hear your commentary on how exactly and what are the plans and potential solutions that you're looking for in order to minimize the impact. Thank you.
Well, first of all, our government has made it clear that we would like to see Britain, the UK, remain as close as possible to the European Union in the future. We accept that they are leaving the European Union. That was a decision made, and if they were to reverse the decision, we'd be very happy, but we're not holding out on that one. We're hoping and we will do everything we can to try and keep the UK as closely connected as possible with the European Union. So we would like the UK, if it so chooses, we'd be very happy if they decided to stay in the single market, which would mean that there would be no divergence between the rules that apply in Britain and the rules that apply in the European Union. And that would facilitate the continued free flow of trade between the EU and the UK, which would be good for Ireland. We would also like to see them stay in the customs union, so there wouldn't be any need for customs checks to be imposed on the borders between the UK and the European Union, including on the border in Ireland. And then when it comes to Ireland, we insist that Ireland is a separate case. Because whatever happens to the overall EU-UK relationship for the future, we must ensure that nothing is done on the island of Ireland that creates problems for this very positive peace process that has transformed Ireland over the last 20 years, and that is actually one of the great achievements of the last century. How many peace processes have managed to create the sort of positive outcome that has occurred in Ireland? So Ireland is a very good example, and we actually are very keen to offer Northern Ireland as the Irish peace process as an example of what could be achieved in other parts of the world if you apply certain principles of non-violence, negotiations, finding solutions. Thank you.
We have a problem with gun control in the United States, and I'm wondering, how is Ireland doing, and what could we learn from perhaps what you're doing that we're not doing?
Well, of course, there's one rule that ambassadors should always apply, and that is not to interfere in the affairs of other countries. However, we can always talk about how things go in Ireland. I think it's safe to say that there's very little of a gun culture tradition in Ireland. I mean, of course, there are people who hunt, especially obviously in rural areas, but it wouldn't be an integral part of our culture in the way, for example, la chasse is in France. If you go to rural France, virtually everyone is involved in hunting during the season. We don't have that tradition in Ireland, really. And in fact, we've always had very strict controls on guns in Ireland because of the risk of those guns being used for nefarious political purposes, as during the Troubles, which happily are now behind us. And one of the big challenges of the peace process was to secure the decommissioning of paramilitary weapons. And that happened. It took a long time to achieve, but it did happen. So that's been our experience. So really, gun control in Ireland is not an issue because it's simply never been a particular problem in Ireland, except when guns were used by paramilitary organizations. And that happily is a thing of the past because of the peace process.
I would like to ask you a separate question, or a slightly off-topic question. What is the effect of Angela Merkel not being able to form a government in Germany for the past 4 months on the EU, and specifically, if any, on the Brexit negotiations?
Well, of course, continental European countries do have a tradition of sometimes taking a long time to form governments after an election. I think at one stage in Belgium, it lasted for more than a year, or maybe even, more than a year. So it's not unusual for European countries where there's a tradition of coalition government. Obviously, in the United States, you have no tradition of coalition governments because you only really have two parties, and therefore you can't have a coalition with only two parties. But in most European countries, including in Ireland, I mean, you can have bipartisanship, of course, but you can't have you can't have a coalition. So in Ireland, we had single party government for a lot of the last 100 years, but now for the last, say, 30 years, we've had a series of coalitions, and it takes time. And in fact, after the last election in Ireland, because there was no clear winner, it took about 4 months for a government to be formed. So it doesn't surprise anybody in Europe that the German government takes time to come together because there was no outright winner of the election. But the fact is that the European Union is made up of governments, and Germany has a government. Now, admittedly, of course, the government doesn't feel in a position to do certain things until it has a firm program for government. So I suppose it is true that the uncertainties in Germany have slowed things down, but I don't believe it's had any effect on the Brexit process, because the Brexit process has taken its course. The EU is fully joined up, it's fully united when it comes to the Brexit process. The view of the European Union is that we want the closest possible relationship with the UK for the future, but you can't have the advantages of membership of the EU without taking on the responsibilities. And really, the negotiation is about how to decide what mix of advantages of membership and responsibilities Britain wants to take on. And really, the ball is in Britain's court. They're the ones who need to say what it is they want. The European Union is quite clear. We want a good relationship, but it can only be a relationship that operates on the basis of balancing responsibilities and advantages.
Hi, my name is Courtney Otrix, and I'm the Communications Director at Global Cleveland. And I'm someone who works in immigration, in the immigration space on a daily basis. And it seems that you understand the impact, the positive impact of immigrants on the economy. So I'm curious, what do you think is something that Ireland does well in handling immigration, and what could the U.S. learn?
Well, again, I don't want to get into domestic debates here, but the Irish story on the immigration front is remarkable. Remember, we had a century or more of mass emigration from Ireland and practically no immigration. It's true that people came back maybe in retirement to Ireland, and that was fine. People were happy about that. But if you look at our population in the mid-1990s, for example, only 20 years ago, 2% of our population was born outside the Irish state at that time. Today, the figure is 17%. So Ireland is now as diverse and more diverse than almost any country in Europe. Britain, for example, has about 15% of its population born outside of Britain. So we have a higher percentage of immigrants in our population than they have in Britain. And this has all occurred in the last 10, 15 years. And remarkably, in Ireland, there has been no backlash. There has been no anti-immigrant movement developed. There's not a single politician or political party that's raised the flag for anti-immigrant sentiment and said, send them home or stop them from coming in and we'll have more jobs for our own people. That was even the case when 5 years ago, our unemployment rate was 15%. And we had 15% of the population born outside the state. Nobody tried to put those two things together and create an anti-immigrant movement. And I'm very proud of that. And I can only attribute it to the fact that the Irish, in their heads, still remember the history of Ireland and the way in which immigrants from Ireland came into the United States and Britain and Australia. And when they came in, they were disliked, and there were various nativist movements, including in this country, that tried to keep the Irish out and discriminated against them. And I've read the history of all of this. But the Irish came through all of that. So the Irish, I think, are a very good example. They were the Irish were the first outside group that came in here in large numbers and that created a stir. And the fact that the Irish have become such an anchor, a pillar of today's America, and indeed for the past century, is a very good example of how immigrant communities can really contribute hugely to a country's dynamism. And most Irish people would recognize that the immigrants who've come into Ireland over the past 15 years have actually contributed quite a lot to our economy. And when they came in, we needed them because our economy was growing rapidly and we needed additional people. And we were fortunate that we got a very good group of people came into Ireland, and we have had very few issues with integration. Most of the people who are in Ireland integrate very well. Their children go to local schools. They don't live in particular areas. They live all over the country, and therefore they don't create a kind of an issue for most Irish people. And I'm always delighted when I see on television kids being interviewed about their examinations, and they have Polish or Latvian or African names, and they're speaking with good, strong Irish accents. That I like very much. That's a sign of progress, I reckon. But the best thing will be, as a sports fan myself, when one of these immigrant children plays for Ireland, or better still, plays for Waterford at hurling.
Hi, I'm Grace Breslin, and I'm a student at Holy Name High School. And I attended our trip over the summer to Ireland, and we went through the border, and it was like easy, and it was pretty much invisible. Yeah. Do you think that it's possible that there could be gates up and guards there again?
Well, the answer is no, because I think that would be impossible, and nobody wants it to happen, and therefore there's no need for it to happen. So, in December, at the European Council, when it was agreed to finish the first phase of the negotiations between the UK and the European Union, it was agreed, the British government agreed, that they would do whatever was required to avoid a hard border being imposed on the island of Ireland. And of course, we have to see how that works out, because they've made the commitment, but we have to now tie it down in legally binding language, and we have to work out exactly how we manage the border with no border controls, but with Britain outside the European Union. And that's going to be a major challenge for the people concerned. But I'm confident that there are enough clever people around that table in Brussels that can come up with solutions to this problem. But the key thing is we must, at all costs, ensure that no border is imposed, no controls are imposed on that open border on the island of Ireland, and everyone is agreed to that.
Ambassador Danny O'Connell with the Ancient Order Hibernians. We misread the notice. We thought it was Greta Mulhall speaking today. But since she's not here, I've got a question.
She'd love to be here.
I've got a question for you since she's not here. As you talk about the Good Friday Agreement and the accomplishments of the Good Friday Agreement, the thing that seems to be left out in conversation as we're getting on 20 years is a large portion of the Good Friday Agreement that hasn't been completed. What's the Irish government, the Dublin government, looking at to help complete what was agreed upon almost 20 years ago?
Yes, you're right that a lot of things have been left undone, and the Irish government has not relaxed its focus on Northern Ireland ever in the last 20 years. We have a special section of our foreign ministry that is devoted to developing links with Northern Ireland, devoted to the implementation, the full implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, and we continue to work hard with the parties in Northern Ireland and with the British government and with our friends around the world in the European Union and in the United States to try to ensure that all of those things that were provided for in the Good Friday Agreement are delivered. You see, the Good Friday Agreement, it's an agreement, it's a framework agreement, but it has all sorts of provisions, and they have to be implemented. And I'd say the problem now, of course, is that the key institutions of the Good Friday Agreement are not functioning properly. So rather than, the issue that you raise is of the things that have never been implemented. They're there, that's true. But the problem is that the things that have been implemented, like the North-South Ministerial Council, the executive in Northern Ireland, between the Unionists and the Republicans and Nationalists, that is now, those institutions have ceased to function properly. And that's the key challenge for us now. It's to recover the ground that's been lost in the last year because of the suspension of the institutions. And the first priority now for our government and for everyone involved needs to be to get those institutions up and running so that they can start to address the issues that haven't been dealt with as part of the Good Friday Agreement package.
Robert, Francis Falls, County Galway. Anyone?
Not Mayo,
Anyone?
That's strange.
Anyone? Bringing up a sore subject, but it's up for debate. Favorite golf course and favorite hole, and why?
Well, I suppose people in Waterford would expect me to say, Waterford Golf Club, the 18th, or Tramore Golf Club, the 17th. But I love the courses on the west of Ireland, and huge numbers of American golfers go there. I love the old head of Kinsale, and my favourite hole there is the 18th. Actually, it's a wonderful sweeping hole along the coast, and I love Tralee Golf Club. I love Waterville. I was in Waterville last year and really enjoyed it immensely. But there's so many golf courses. The great thing about Ireland, by the way, in golfing terms, is that we have a population of 6.5 million on the island of Ireland. We have 400 golf courses. So there's a golf course for every taste. And the other thing is that our golf courses are extremely friendly. You play a very good course. A lot of them don't cost very much to play, by the way. The famous ones do, but the other ones don't. And you go into the clubhouse afterwards, and people will treat you like you're a long-lost friend, especially if you're an American, especially if you're from Cleveland and you're visiting Mayo or Achill.
Hi, sorry. Hi, my name is Julianne Kerber, and I'm a student at Mayfield High School. Thank you for speaking today. I think many people would agree that Irish people are very proud to be Irish.
Yes.
And my question is, where do you think that sense of national pride in your culture stems from?
Right. That's a question that I love answering because my forte is cultural diplomacy, because I believe that one of the great assets we have in Ireland is our culture, our literature. Think of the number of great writers that have come from Ireland. Remember, we acquired the English language not through our own choice, but because our neighbouring island, took us over, and we had to acquire their language. But look at what we've done with it. Jonathan Swift, his 350th birthday was last year. Irishman wrote Gulliver's Travels. And you have all those 18th century writers, Goldsmith, Sheridan. Then the 19th century, you've got, and 20th century, W.B. Yeats, James Joyce, Sean O'Casey, John Millington Synge, Beckett, Seamus Heaney, and then a whole range of contemporary writers, many of whom actually work and teach now in the United States, because a lot of your colleges are very, very good for taking in Irish writers and giving them gainful employment, which is great, brilliant. So look, we Irish have a very vibrant culture. And you know how I prove this is that you go to Ireland anytime, you go to any village in Ireland, and you will be able to listen to traditional Irish music played by local people for their own pleasure and enjoyment. And tourists, of course, come in and they love this. But that is not something that we put on just for the tourists. We actually like it ourselves. And many Irish people like to play our own music. And they've carried that music around the world with them. So I think that at the base of all of this is the fact that the Irish have a rural culture. Even though most of us now live in towns and cities, we have a rural culture. And it's a culture where people got together and told stories and played music. And then when they went around the world, they carried that spirit with them. And they never lost it. And I mentioned in my speech that the Irish, when they went around the world, including to the United States, and we at home have managed somehow to combine being a very modern country, I mean, the internet usage in Ireland is up there with the best in the world. There are more Irish people on Facebook and Twitter per head of the population than most countries in the world. In fact, I'm on Twitter, at Dan Mulhall. I tweet every morning. In fact, I tweet a poem every morning. And this week, I'm tweeting in the Gaelic language because we're trying to give the Gaelic language a global footprint this week. And so I should say something in Irish. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, sir. Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a Friday forum with His Excellency Daniel Mulhall, Ambassador of Ireland to the United States. Our forum today is the Paul A. and Sonia F. Unger International Forum on Cleveland in the World, made possible by an endowment gift from Paul A. Unger. We appreciate their continued support of City Club programming. Our community partners for our event today are the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, Cleveland Public Theater, the Irish Network Cleveland, and Global Cleveland. We appreciate your support, all of you. And we thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our forum. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Cleveland Clinic, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland Incorporated.